Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing out there? D Square with you today. We're going to go ahead and do a review of Dark Phoenix. I am going to go spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, this isn't really going to be the right place for you. I do definitely want to talk a little bit about spoilers. For those of you that may want at least a little bit of a spoiler review, I would say that there are a couple of good parts in this movie, particularly the opening scene. And I think Michael Fassbender does an awesome job of playing Magneto, as always. Of course, he should be aged a lot more. He still looks, the same as he did back in the 60s. Of course, this movie takes place 30 years later in the 90s, and he still looks like he's in his mid 30s. But I digress. The rest of his performance is good. I don't think it's a good wrap up to the series. We're now learning about all sorts of production problems and things like that. So, unfortunately, this is not good, and I really do not recommend you see it. Unless, I don't know, you got nothing else better to do. Now, with that said, my wife, who doesn't read the comics, only really knows the X-Men through the movies, did enjoy it a lot. She thought it was an awesome movie. So, I mean, it's better than most movies out there, but as far as comic book movies go, it really isn't that good. So, it's not something that I would recommend. There's a lot of things about it that just don't make sense, which we will get into here momentarily. So, but that is my spoiler-free review. For those of you that just want to know if you should go and see it, there you go. From here on out, we're going to be into spoiler territory. So, as I mentioned, there is a scene in the beginning of this movie that is really cool. And the scene I'm talking about is this movie opens up with the president calling Professor Xavier. He has a phone that goes straight to the president, and the president can pick up and go straight to him. And there is some, astronauts in trouble in space. There's a spaceship, a shuttle that's just kind of spinning out in orbit. And so the president calls on Charles Xavier and his X-Men to help them. And they do. And it's this really cool scene where they all get into the Blackbird and shoot up into space. There's some question of whether this is a safe mission they should go on. And you'll see that, later in the film. It kind of plays upon that when everyone starts to kind of turn against Charles Xavier and his decisions, which I really weren't thinking it was that bad. But so, of course, Mystique is like the team leader, so she's with them, goes up to space and all that. So it really was kind of cool, other than the fact that I had to sit there and watch Mystique be a part of the X-Men. If you took her out of the scene, it really would have been a cool, like, X-Men scene of X-Men doing X-Men stuff. It was really cool to see that, to see him go up into space in the X-Wing and, save the astronauts and be hailed a hero. That really was cool to see. What didn't make sense is basically the rest of the movie. We go through this, this scene that I just described, which was cool, that, it culminates in this cosmic entity, coming toward them, and Jean Grey ends up absorbing it, using her power, saving everyone, and absorbing it into herself. They take her down to Earth, and, she's knocked out for a little bit, then she wakes up, and then you just kind of start dealing with her powers and how her powers are awakening. A lot of scenes, with Raven or Mystique, whatever you want to call her, they refer to as Raven in this movie, where she's not in her makeup. Same thing with the Beast. He's like never in Beast form, and now he can just go in and out of it at will. That's not the Beast character, and that's the sort of things that I'm talking about that make these movies just stupid, because they take things that are uncharacteristic of these characters and they make it so. Like, Mystique would not, be running around in her, blonde hair form, especially when she's around a bunch of mutants, and that happens. Now, there is a little bit of poetic justice here. During Jean's freakouts, one of them where, of course, Mystique is trying to talk her down, which, again, would never happen. But, while Mystique is trying to do that, Jean Grey's powers do get out of control, and they end up pushing Mystique onto some like equipment, some spikes, and she ends up dying. Which, Beast blames himself for, because at some point during this movie, before this happened, Mystique kind of, tries to talk, Hank about, what, we should go. Charles Xavier is just worried about the fame of the X-Men. And Charles has a good point here, about him liking the fame. He says, as opposed to them hating and fearing us, hunting him down, yeah, you're right, I like this. And, the reason why we have to fly around, be flashy, wear identical costumes is because we're only one bad day away from becoming the enemy again. So I thought it was a really good point. But nonetheless, they kind of have a little rift there. But, Beast talks her into staying with the X-Men, which unfortunately gets her killed. So he takes that guilt, and, he's pissed off at Xavier for, his part and everything. And so he kind of joins Magneto. So does, the Sophie Turner, Jean Grey. She also seeks out Magneto, but he kind of turns her away. And then he he doesn't want you here, because he's got like a new Genosha going on. They've got like this village of mutants. We meet a couple of his new henchmen, none of them that make sense. One of them's like a telepath. One of them has like the movable dreadlocks, with basically the male version of Medusa from the Inhumans, which is dumb. Of all the hundreds of mutants that you get to pick, that you could introduce in this movie, you make up a character with dumb powers. I just don't get it. But nonetheless, so goes these movies. Well then, Magneto turns Jean Grey away, then starts hunting her. It's just a really discombobulated movie. It really is. Magneto's wearing black. He's got his black helmet. There's these other villains that are introduced. When you first see them, they look like Groot. Then there's this one scene where one of them, and they're like these shape changing. So originally they were supposed to be the Skrulls. There was going to be like a Marvel version of Skrulls and a Fox version of Skrulls. Apparently, since, Fox is now owned by Disney, they've decided to make them a part of the Dabari Empire, and they are these shape changers. Again, to me, they look like Groot, but in one scene, also look like General Snoke when one of them gets shot with this big machine gun. It looks like he's Supreme Leader Snoke. So, really bad villains. Their story is they come from a planet that the Phoenix destroyed, so now they're following it around, trying to gain the power. And so here's a dumb trope. The end battle ends up being Jean Grey and this Dabari alien chick, and she wants the Phoenix power, but it has to be given to her by Jean Grey. And it's the whole like, oh, too much power. You want all the power, too much power. So just really, really bad. Really bad. And, now that the movie's been out for almost a week, we're just hearing about so much confusion and so much disorder when it comes to even making these movies, just no one being on board with the direction. And certainly this would just be a horrible, horrible thing to happen, if not for the fact, hallelujah, that Disney, of course, now does own the movie rights to the X-Men, so we can sear this shit sandwich in our brain and just remember it, and remember that it's going to be worth the wait to get our beloved X-Men in the Disney MCU, hopefully treated right, hopefully treated with more respect, and us get a good feeling about our X-Men that we did with the Avengers. So do not bother with the movie. Interesting note though, although there is not a end credits scene, they do show like this new Marvel intro that's just all Stan Lee. I'm not sure if it's just all his cameos from just the X-Men, but it does play like this remastered version of the X-Men 90s cartoon theme. So maybe a sign of something to come, but the X-Men are not slated to join the MCU for at least 5 years. So we'll probably see Fantastic Four way before then. So there you go. I knew I would be disappointed. There are two scenes in particular that I found cool, which is the X-Men going into the Blackbird and going up into space to save the astronauts. And then there's that fight scene during on the train, and Magneto has a cool part in that where he like throws all these debris into one of the train cars, and then you see it just kind of crumble around him. That was really cool. Outside of that, I did not enjoy it. If you're someone that's maybe not so dedicated to the source material, you may enjoy it. Like my wife, she thought it was an awesome movie. So, again, if you don't hold any comic book bias or nerd rage like myself, you may absolutely love this movie. It's got a lot of action. The effects are great. The writing's still crap if you ask me, but it's still going to be an exciting movie. So there you have it. Well, continuing on with our X-Men theme of today's D-Squared Talk, I want to talk about this controversy that has arisen around the X-Men name. Now, that has always been there. It's always been a joke about why are they the X-Men. There's a lot of women on the team. Indeed, there are. A lot of women have led the X-Men. So there was even some news out that, someone, at Disney felt that maybe they should even change the name when they come to the MCU because it's an outdated misogynist name. And let me explain to you why it's ridiculous. Okay? Perhaps you haven't thought about this, so let me help you out here. So, X-Men, right? Of course, yes, this was back in the 60s, so you got your Superman, your Batman. I mean, so that's a common naming template. But okay, it is the 60s, X-Men, Charles Xavier, the X gene. And so the X gene is really the key here. It's not specifically men. See, X can mean a lot of things. Hence the X gene. Hence the bunch of different type of mutations that the mutants experience. So X in this sense is not meaning a particular thing. It's meaning anything. Meaning that X-Men could be woman, he-men, she-men, anything. Because mutants can be anything. It's not outside the realm of possibility that there's mutants with multiple sexes, with no sexes. So, it should not really be taken as a misogynist term, although I understand it just clearly has the word men in there, but it also has the X in there, which, as we know, is a commonly used letter for a variable, particularly a variable that can mean multiple different things. So please let's put to rest the fact that the X-Men is a misogynist name. I think if you familiarize yourself with the source material, you will understand that the X-Men and the X-Men brand is anything but misogynist, with a lot of its great characters being female, a lot of the leaders being female. In fact, I know more female leaders than I do male leaders in the X-Men. If I think of male leaders in the X-Men, I'm thinking Professor Xavier, Cyclops, okay, maybe Wolverine. When I think of female leaders in the X-Men, I'm thinking Jean Grey, I'm thinking Storm, I'm thinking Kitty Pryde, I'm thinking Psylocke. I mean, there's just been a bunch of women leaders. So, I don't think it's misogynist at all. That's not what it means. And if you change the name, then it will cease to be the X-Men. It will cease to be something I love. So I would just implore any of you that believe that it could be a misogynist name to really rethink about what it's saying there and what X can mean. And I think you'll definitely come to the conclusion that X-Men is actually a very inclusive name that we should all continue to embrace, knowing that it stands for anyone can be special. Okay? All right, well, that's going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and conclude this D-Squared Talks kind of X-Men edition. I hope that my thoughts were helpful to you about the movie. I'm pretty sure by now you've gotten a pretty good sense of what's in store for you, but just coming from a perspective of an X-Men comic book fan, someone that certainly has seen all the movies, I am thoroughly disappointed. But if you've just followed the X-Men movies and you like great effects and good action, then you may enjoy it. So the choice is yours. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so very much for joining me here on D Square Talks. We will see you next time. Peace out.